The Aspect of Agility Medallion is Fortnite's most overpowered item ever. Of course, there's been incredibly overpowered vehicles such as the mechs and planes, but when you think of overpowered items in Fortnite, your mind may go to the Chapter 2 Season 5 drum gun, the P90 on the day of its release, the primal shotgun, the infinity blade, or even the railgun. But all of these have one thing in common. They're able to make worse players win fights against players much better than them, which lowers the skill gap of the game. The other common trait they have, outside of the infinity blade, is that they're evenly distributed so anyone can find them. One of the reasons the drum gun was so frustrating on release was simply because everyone had one, and it made such a massive percentage of the fights unskilled and just annoying. But you as a player could also take a drum gun to counter a drum gun. The infinity blade was just incredibly stupid, and there was only one of them on the map. However, most players were so bad at that time that it was still relatively difficult to play out an entire match using it and not die. Plus, it only lasted 3 days and only impacted one tournament. Now, I'm not downplaying the strength of the infinity blade, but it just didn't last very long. Unlike the Aspect of Agility Medallion, which has remained untouched for the entire of Chapter 5 Season 2, in my eyes making it a top contender for the best item of all time. It doesn't have insane damage output like some older overpowered weapons, but what makes it so broken isn't even the item itself, it's the meta and the context in which it's available in. The mobility items in Chapter 5 Season 2 tournaments are the Flowberry Fizz, which grants a low gravity effect, the Banana of the Gods, which increases movement speed and jump height while sprinting, and the Wings of Icarus, which almost no one uses in duo tournaments. Both of the viable mobility items in the game essentially just make you move a little faster and cancel fall damage, all whilst taking 2 seconds to activate. This can make rotations in the 6th, 7th, and 8th zones particularly difficult because it's incredibly easy for players to shoot you and get shot while rotating. This essentially means that every team in the lobby must use their materials and most importantly their brain power, which if you've ever played a low elo match of a tournament, you'll know can be a bit of a struggle. But this does not apply to the holders of the Aspect of Agility Medallion. Since this item gives the user infinitely recharging dashes, when the user faces a tough rotation, they can just ramp up into the sky, and as soon as they're chopped out, they can just use the dashes to safely fly to the other side of the zone. Since the player moves so quickly when using the dash, it's incredibly difficult to hit them, resulting in a safe, fast rotation for the medallion holder, whilst everyone else below drains their materials and health to make it. Even if they don't do the ramp strat, they save so many materials just by using dashes instead of running by foot. According to Kinch Analytics, the dash medallion advantage is somewhere similar to letting a duo have 4,500 materials instead of 3,000, or 3 extra heal slots between the two players. This dash effect would be strong if everyone had it, and if the zone pools were in the northwest of the map, to some extent everyone does, as they can just get the dash effect from the river Styx. However, there's only a single Aspect of Agility Medallion on the map, which means that there's only one player or team that has these advantages permanently. This is similar to the Catty launcher in Chapter 2 Season 3. On the face of it, it's strong, but it's not the most overpowered mythic item ever. It's basically just a lot of shockwaves. But in the context of that season where crash pads were the main mobility item, the Catty launcher was one of the most sought after weapons in the game. Compare that to the shockwave hammer in Chapter 4 Season 1, which was also just basically shockwave mobility, but this time with infinite uses. And yes, it was overpowered and annoying for mobility, but what balanced it slightly was that almost everyone had one, unlike the kit's shockwave launcher. And this premise is what makes the Aspect of Agility Medallion so overpowered. Given the effect of the medallion is infinitely recharging and can be passed between the both teammates to give the effect to each other, the one team with this medallion in the lobby has a massive advantage in terms of conserving materials and making infinitely safer rotations. I know what you might be thinking, okay, so one team has it and it helps them rotate a little bit easier than the rest of the lobby, but a contender for the most broken item of all time, really? Well, it doesn't really make bad players good. In fact, they just use it to run away from you, which could be hella annoying. But this small dash enhances almost every element of professional players' gameplay and massively sets them apart from the other players of the same skill level. Firstly, it's incredibly unpredictable, which can make tracking players in a fight very difficult. In this off-spawn fight, Pollo jumps into the sky using the Flowberry effect, something which would usually leave the player exposed and easy to hit, especially since he can't protect himself within builds from here. However, he completely changes the trajectory that he's flying and moves towards the opponent, allowing him to piece them up and quickly end the fight. From the opponent's POV, he's looking down, but he sees a shot from quite far away. Now he has full visibility into the tile in front of him, him, so it's safe in his mind to assume that the shot came from quite a distance away, so he just places a wall to block any more shots from this angle. Now his assumption was actually correct, however he's thrown off after Pollo dashes after that shot, closing the distance, and then is able to just piece him up. In this other example, Peter spots that an opponent has started to tarp into the zone, but hasn't placed a wall on the end of that tarp. Because dashing has zero visual audio, unlike footsteps, Peterbot dashes at the end of the tarp, grabbing the wall whilst catching himself on a floor. Now just watch this from the other team's POV and tell me how hard this is to predict this play. Now sure, the players made a bad play by not placing a wall here, however the dashes open up a huge amount of plays that otherwise just would not be possible. For example, whilst box fighting, if you weaken the opponent's wall, you can just dash straight through it and break it, removing any requirement to replace their wall and do any box fighting trickery. You can just get straight into their box. In this example, the dash could also be used for quick rotations to allow Peterbot and Pollo to set up perfectly around opponents. Here, Baka and Pars are boxed up and Peterbot and Pollo approach from the north. However, Peterbot drops under the bridge and uses the dashes to wrap around to the other side of the box, starting off the fight with a perfect pinch onto Baka and Pars. Being sprayed from both sides makes them panic, so Baka attempts to make a peanut butter peek to try and get some counter damage, but he exposes himself, which allows Peterbot to open up the fight with a 97 damage shot whilst taking 0 damage in return. However, since Baka just reset the wall, that's meant that it's weak, which allows Peterbot just to dash straight through the wall as he shoots his shotgun before wiping out Baka in a matter of seconds. Now it's a 2v1 and Peter and Pollo basically just cannot lose this. Now these weren't bad players on the region by any means, they're both FNCS champions, but with Peterbot and Pollo's incredible fighting skills combined with the aspect of Agility Medallion, they look like complete floppers. The aspect of Agility Medallion is actually so strong, it's resulted in some players dropping the aspect of Siphon Medallion. Now you may think I mean swapping one medallion for the other, but no, that's not what I mean. When a player is holding medallion, their rough location is shown to the rest of the lobby and the map. So in this game, after grabbing the medallion from Grim Gate, Peterbot and Pollo rotate northwest to the underworld to fight the team here who has the aspect of Siphon Medallion. However, as soon as this team sees them coming on the map, they just drop the Siphon Medallion and run the opposite direction in hopes of not getting W-keyed. For reference, it actually worked temporarily as they escaped, but of course they got W-keyed later on in the game by Peterbot and Pollo. The aspect of Agility Medallion also allows the user to conserve materials in ways that are extremely odd. In this match, Peterbot gets a knock and jumps off of a tall building holding the body, then throws it down to guarantee the elim and uses a dash to cancel his own fall damage. This allows him to get out of a tricky box that had a ton of enemy builds without wasting any materials, but it also takes the opponent's attention away from Pollo, which allows him to finish the fight quickly. Cancelling all fall damage is also just incredibly useful in endgame, as Pollo gets an elim from height with his SMG, and he can just drop down onto the body, dash onto the loot, not wasting any materials. This could also be done with a Flowberry Fizz, however this takes 2 seconds to activate and you fall slower, which would mean that Pollo would more than likely take a few ticks to the storm just in order to grab this loot. And playing height is undoubtedly one of the most powerful uses for the aspect of Agility Medallion. In this match, Peterbot and Pollo ramp up looking for height in the 8th zone, however to their north is Diminished and Cam as they're also looking to take height. Usually in this situation, if the next zone pulls towards Cam and Diminished, they pretty much have guaranteed height going into the moving zones. However, just before the zone pops, Peterbot and Pollo Flowberry Fizz in preparation for the zone to pull far and begin to ramp towards them to dash onto their heads. But instead, the zone pulls to the southwest, and instead they can just use this Fizz and Dash combination to claim height right before anyone else. However, they get sprayed out and dropped, which usually would result in Peter taking fall damage, but they can just use the dash to cancel that fall damage. Now he does get beamed in the process of falling, resulting in him having to spend more time healing and nearly dying, which for most people would mean that they get stuck in the backside of the storm, and then the rest of the lobby would just shoot and spray you, and then you'd probably die or just waste a bunch of materials. However, you know, Peterbot and Pollo both have dashes, so they can just spend more time popping heals to make sure they're healthier here, and then just dash to the front side of the zone. Now when they eventually do retake height later in the game, Peterbot gets an elim in the backside of the storm onto Paco. Any better. And most people here probably would waste the Banana of the Gods to ensure they grab the loot from the storm to keep them moving, but Peterbot can simply just use one dash to get himself back into safety, which then allows him to use the banana to tank storm later to drop behind an opponent's tarp and pick up 2 more elims before doing the exact same thing later for another 2 elims on players who are trying to heal off for more placement. Here Peter got 4 additional elims, all because he saved a single Banana of the Gods by using one single dash. On top of this, their height holds when they're up there are naturally staggered, which allows them to spray for longer, leading to more pressure on the teams below. Since one player can just dash to the front side, they don't need to use as many materials holding height. This also allows one player to be right at the front, front, whilst another player is right at the back, giving them full complete control and vision onto the players down below, allowing them to get a higher amount of elims in the endgame. And here's the thing, even if they lose height, they have the perfect way to retake it. Now, using a dash while looking directly up will fire the player 2 tiles high into the sky. However, this gets even better when you're combining it with the Flowbreak Fizz effect. How many times have I said that this season? Is actually insane. In this duo Cash Cup finals, where Peterbot and Pollo won 5 of the 6 games, the zone just switched from the 9th zone to the 10th zone. Now, during this transition, Rise begins to tarp ahead on height, and knowing this timing, Peterbot and Pollo Flowbreak Fizz together and both sprint, jump, and dash using this low gravity effect. They fly from different angles at the exact same time, creating a perfect pinch onto Rise on height. And the funny thing is, since there's only one team in the lobby that has the aspect of Agility Medallion, which is Peterbot and Pollo, once they're on height, they don't have to worry about this happening to them, since they're the only one who has the dashes. And we can't forget, you have to beat Cerberus to obtain the medallion, which also grants you the best shotgun in the game, the Mythic Gatekeeper shotgun. Again, very similar to Chapter 2 Season 3, where Kit would rock both the Shockwave launcher and the Mythic Charge shotgun. So the real question is, if it's so good, why aren't more people landing at Grim Gate and contesting for it? Well, they are. Sort of. In any tournament where winning the game is a requirement to earn money or to qualify to something, there's no surprise that Grim Gate is the most hotly contested drop spot on the map. In any finals, there's on average 2 to 3 teams landing at this drop spot, but you would think it would be more. In EU, only one Tier 1 pro team is actually landing here, and that's Malabuka and Moustache. However, the usual strategy at Grim Gate is to 50-50 the god chest on the top, but since Malabuka and Moustache are not hard 0 ping, they're not guaranteed to get the loot from this chest, and in fact might be at a disadvantage against some of the other teams. In their first qualifier, after losing 2 games off spawn, they actually moved back to fencing fields where they won FNCS from Season 1. The rest of the teams landing here aren't exactly Tier 1 duos, and the main reason the best teams in the region don't want to land at Grim Gate and fight for the Cerberus Medallion is because it is a complete mess. Not only are they guaranteed to have multiple teams fight them off spawn, but they are guaranteed that teams like Ferdoxy and Trippern will push in and third party. Even if you manage to have a successful game off spawn, it's incredibly difficult to get a good inventory of heals and materials because you're just constantly fighting more and more teams who are looking for this loot. However, what's currently happening with Peterbot and Pollo in NA is a bit of an anomaly. Peterbot is hard 0 ping, living in Texas, whereas the majority of NA are playing on, 20 ping or more due to the population distribution in the US, and that's actually including Pollo as he's closer to 30. So unless a team 50-50ing them off spawn is another Tier 1 pro team that currently lives in Texas on 0 ping, the chances are that they're just going to get this loot from this 50-50 chest and win the fight off spawn. Now, 0 ping obviously is not the reason that they're successful, but in grabbing weapons from a chest in a 50-50 is absolutely beneficial. Currently, no other Tier 1 pro team is willing to contest them, as similar to EU, most of the best NA teams don't want to deal with this mess, and obviously Peterbot and Pollo are the best fighting team in the region, so they're just scary to contest as is, so this results in way less teams actually trying to fight them off spawn. However, another massive issue with this drop spot is that as tournaments get closer to finishing, players that need a big game to move up the leaderboards decide it's worth taking the risk of landing Grim Gate, because they know the medallion is worth fighting for. In one of the last games from both FNCS qualifiers, Peterbot and Pollo had 5 teams contesting them looking for the Grim loot. And unsurprisingly, these were not Peterbot and Pollo's most successful matches. Ironically, the one thing that makes the aspect of Agility Medallion so good, the fact that there's only one of them, is also the thing that makes it tricky and inconsistent. Some items make bad players able to get lucky and win the odd fight against good players, but the truly overpowered items enable pros to dominate other pros, and the aspect of Agility Medallion does not make bad players good, but what it does is massively enhance the aggressive teams to an almost unstoppable level. In fact, it's so good, it's statistically worth dying off spawn for. In FNCS Qualifier 2 finals, where Peterbot and Pollo won by almost over 100 points, they actually died early in 5 of their 10 games going for the coin. They lost 50% of their games and still won the tournament because the aspect of Agility Medallion is that good. Of course, they are just the best fighting duo, so they're not hard carried buying it, but it massively enhances their fighting skills and acts as a get out of jail free card in many situations. But in Fortnite's history, I've yet to see an item so strong that it's worth dying in 50% of your games just so you can still win the tournament in the other 50%.